Last week I finished the series that I was doing on creation spirituality, and I really only scratched the surface, and I'm thinking of maybe even doing a second part sometime later in the spring. But for Lent, I wanted to do something really different. I turned the tables, and instead of me picking themes for sermons, I gave that task to you to see what you could come up with, and you did. I received about 25 suggestions for things that I could talk about, and I could only choose 5, so forgive me if yours wasn't chosen. The criteria that I used for choosing them was I wanted them to be something that really challenged me, that I had not maybe preached on before. Secondly, I wanted them to kind of fit into the category of Lent, sort of more Lenten themes. And thirdly, I didn't want to choose something that I may have spoken about within the last few weeks. So based on that, I narrowed it down to 5 topics, and here they are. I'm going to put them up on the screen for you. This week is hope versus optimism. And then what does prayer change? Tough times and tough people. Number 4 is the rest of the story. And finally, number 5 is fate versus faith. So I hope you'll join us for all of those. And what I've done each week is ask the person who made the suggestion just to give me a short write-up on why they chose the topic that they did. So the first topic today was chosen by Daniel Johnson, hope versus optimism, and here's what he sent to me. We've often heard people comment on a tough situation by saying something like, "I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful." Hope requires faith. Optimism requires evidence. The pandemic is the latest challenge to our physical and mental well-being, both individually and as a society and nation. Trumpism, climate change, social injustice have all preceded it and have all dimmed my optimism, causing me to fall back on hope more and more. For me, the question is hope enough, or do we also need optimism, tangible proof that things will get better? It's a good challenge. So let me begin, before I get to this topic, by sharing a reading from the Bible, which is a reading that is actually often shared at the beginning of Lent. It's a little piece of the story of the Israelites crossing over the Jordan River to begin a 40-year journey through the wilderness to get to the Promised Land, part of why we celebrate 40 days of Lent. It's taken from Exodus 14, chapter 15. The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on both their right and their left. Then Moses ordered Israel to set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness to begin a journey away from slavery towards the land that the Lord had promised to them. Amen. Let us pray. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our light. Amen. In the 1970s, the British comedy group Monty Python's Flying Circus showed us that no topic was taboo for them when they produced a movie called The Life of Brian. The movie is about a regular guy named Brian who lived at the time of Jesus and was mistaken for the Messiah and followed accordingly. Predictably, it was condemned by many in the Christian faith who called it irreverent at best and blasphemous at worst. It certainly did push a lot of buttons. But behind the irreverence and the downright silliness of anything Monty Python does, there really was a very good message about the dangers of blind faith. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to reference was a scene at the end of the movie. In this scene, Brian is predictably crucified, and as he's on the cross, there are others around him also being crucified. One of those turns out to be an incredibly positive guy, and rather than see the bad side of his situation, He instead sings what has become an iconic song. Always look on the bright side of life. Sing along if you know it at home. Some things in life are bad. They can really make you sad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle, and that will help things turn out for the best. Always look on the bright side of life. Da-da, da-da, da. Okay, I'll stop. Completely ridiculous scene, I know it was, but I have to confess, when Daniel gave me this theme of optimism versus hope, that was the song that immediately came to mind. The ultimate song of the optimist. Always look on the bright side of life. Don't we love optimistic people? People who always see the glass as half full, who refuse to let life drag them down, who, when chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble but give a whistle. Are you one of those optimistic people? If I asked you to picture the most optimistic person you know, whose face comes to mind? You know, for me, there was a guy in my first church in Beaton, and his name was Tom. And Tom was the most optimistic guy I ever knew. He was always smiling, always happy, always friendly. Even when things were difficult, he always had a great personality, always had an optimistic view of things. And I once asked him, "Why are you so positive all the time?" And I remember he said, "Well, it's the only way to be." And it's true, it is. It really is the best way to be, even though it can be hard to be. A lot of great thinkers have shared their thoughts on optimism as well. Former President Harry Truman once said, "A pessimist is one who makes difficulties out of opportunities. An optimist is one who makes opportunities out of difficulties." The Dalai Lama, well, there's a pretty positive guy. He once said, "Choose optimism, it will always make you feel better." Someone else said that an optimist is like a tea kettle that sings even when it's up to its nose in hot water. Or there's this story, maybe you've heard this before, about the psychiatrist who had two sons. One son was a pessimist and one son was an optimist. So he decided he'd do an experiment and see if he could turn his pessimistic son into an optimist and his optimistic son into a pessimist. So, on Christmas morning, he filled his pessimistic son's room filled with lots and lots of gifts. In the optimist son's room, he put a pile of manure. Christmas morning came, and after a while he went to check on his two sons. In his pessimistic son's room, there was his son sitting on the floor with all his gifts, opening them up with a scowl on his face. "Oh, this is the wrong size, this one's the wrong color, I never really wanted this." Not positive about any of the gifts that he opened up. So he went down the hall to his optimistic son's room, and his son was happy and jumping around and excited. His dad said, "Son, why are you so excited?" "Because," he said, "with this much manure, there's got to be a pony around here somewhere." I don't think you would disagree with me that optimism is a great state of mind to cultivate, especially in these times that we're going through. We need our optimists to keep our spirits up. They are the people who, despite the masks and physical distancing or the hand sanitizing and the isolation, refuse to give up and crawl under their blankets and hibernate all year, but they still keep engaging with life, and they still keep engaging with others as best they can. They are the people who, when someone says, "Things can't get any worse," they respond positively, "Oh, yes, they can." Oh, wait a second, that doesn't really work, does it? But you get my point. By the way, have you heard this one? A pessimist can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. The optimist can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The realist sees the light as an oncoming train, and the train conductor just sees three fools standing on the tracks. I thought that was kind of cute. We can all agree that optimism is a great trait to have. And we can all give thanks to our optimists among us who are helping us to get through these times. But the purpose of this message was not just to hold up the traits of optimism, but the challenge Daniel gave me was to compare the optimist with hope. And I've got to say, it is a challenge. It really got my brain working overtime this week. Are they the same thing? Optimism and hope? Well, I would say they're certainly on the same spectrum. And I dare say that someone who's optimistic has a good chance of being someone who's hopeful. And someone who's hopeful can probably often be optimistic, but not necessarily. For example, you could have hated the snow this week, but still be hopeful about the coming of spring. On the other hand, you could have waxed poetically about how beautiful the snow clung to the trees, making it a winter wonderland, and then in the next breath say, yeah, but it seems like spring's never going to get here. So the two are not necessarily the same. So what are the differences? Well, I've researched and researched and researched all week, and I'm amazed at how many studies have been done comparing the two. So here's a couple of differences between optimism and hopefulness. Well, Daniel really nailed the first one himself. Optimism is usually evidence-based. We are optimistic because we have a proven reason to be, whereas hope is often faith-based. We have faith that things can get better even if they're not right now. But let me build on that with some further ideas. Optimism generally comes from a positive place, where hope is often born out of a negative situation. For example, one study I read used a sports analogy. Let's use hockey. Let's say your team has a history of winning the Stanley Cup. You will be optimistic that your team will win. On the other hand, if your team does not have a history of that, you won't be optimistic, but you can still be hopeful. Or as one writer put it, hope is tapped into when odds are low, yet individuals are highly invested in the outcome. Bruins fans are optimists. Leaf fans are hopeful. What does that mean for life? It means that optimistic people usually have a positive history behind them. Things have generally worked out for them. And they've learned over the years that despite bumps and setbacks, the world is generally conspiring towards good. And even if things look gray right now, the sun's going to come out again because it always has and it always will. For example, if an optimistic person loses their job, they generally won't fall apart because they know they have a good skill set, they've worked all their lives, they know in the past they haven't had a hard time finding a job, so they have reason to believe that this is but a minor setback and they will soon be employed again. If you say to them, wow, that's rough, so sorry you lost your job, they might just cheerfully say, don't worry about it. I know another job's coming along. Optimists make great surfers. If they get knocked off one wave, they just wait because they know the next one's coming along. And we will be impressed with their optimism. It's born of a history of things working out. It is evidence-based. Hopeful people, on the other hand, may not have had the same kind of positive experiences in life. In fact, life may have been downright cruel to them. But they refuse to stop moving forward. They refuse to stop believing that at some point down the road, things can and will get better. For example, do you know what some of the most hopeful music is? Music that we put into the category of African American spirituals. Music that grew out of years of slavery, sung in the fields of the Deep South or in black churches. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Often their songs were faith-based, about Jesus or about heaven. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen, nobody knows but Jesus. Just a little history note. You know, often in those spirituals, they talk about the River Jordan, which is, of course, the river that divided in the Bible that I just talked about, that let the slaves come out of Egypt led by Moses. But actually in those songs, it was often a subtle reference to the Ohio River, which was one of the first stops on the Underground Railroad that were taking them to freedom in Canada. The point is, those songs are not optimistic songs, just as those singing them were not optimistic people. They had no reason to be optimistic. Life had treated them harshly. But they are songs of hope, resilience, strength, and a deep and rich faith in which they believed that God was not blind or deaf to their suffering. But whether in this life or the next, there was hope for release from their bondage, hope for freedom. And that's what they sang of. They sang of that hope. So again, optimism is usually born of a belief that life conspires to goodness, just as it always has, just as it always will. The glass is half full. Hope is tapped into when odds are low and yet individuals are highly invested in a positive outcome. Another difference between hope and optimism. It's a little more difficult to articulate. As much as I love optimism and optimistic people, and I do, I think that hope is something a little deeper. Optimism is like a flower. It's beautiful and charming and radiant, but it can quickly wither when things go the wrong way, when there's no evidence anymore to support it. But hope is something deeper. It's more like a plant. It may not be as beautiful or as pretty, but it's hardier, and it seems to find a source of water much deeper down. Optimism is what you want at a party, but hope is what you want at your hospital bedside. When we are at those low times, we don't want just smiles and promises that everything will work out. We want something with roots, something honest and real that can speak to our vulnerability or speak to our fragile moments or those fragile places within and still give us a sense of encouragement and peace. Hope is what tells us that even if everything is not all right, we can still be all right. Hope is the ability to help someone believe in themselves or believe in the power of grace or believe in God. Hope doesn't always come with a smile, but it always comes with a promise that you are not alone. Let me give you an example. It's a great illustration of the power of hope. Several years ago, a teacher assigned to visit children in a large city hospital received a routine call requesting that she visit a particular child. She took the boy's name and room number down and was told by the teacher on the other end of the line, "We are studying nouns and verbs in class. I'd be grateful if you could help him with his homework so he doesn't fall behind the other students in his class." It wasn't until the visiting teacher got outside the boy's room that she realized it was located in the hospital's burn unit. No one had prepared her to find a young boy horribly burned and in great pain. She felt that she couldn't just turn around and walk out, so she awkwardly stammered, "I'm the hospital teacher, and your teacher sent me to help you with nouns and adverbs." And that's exactly what she went on to do. The next morning, a nurse in the burn unit asked her, "What did you do to that boy?" Before she could finish a profusion of apologies, the nurse interrupted her. "No, you don't understand. His whole attitude has changed. He's fighting back, responding to treatment. It's as though he's decided to live." The boy did live, and later explained that he had completely given up hope until he saw that teacher. It all changed when he came to the simple realization, which he said with joyful tears, expressed this way: they wouldn't send a teacher to work on nouns and adverbs with a dying boy, would they? What that teacher did, without even knowing it, was she gave that boy hope. In her own genuine, vulnerable, yet positive way, she gave that boy a message that he was valued even in these harsh circumstances. And that turned out to be a healing message. If she'd come into that room just with a big smile on her face and say, "Hey there, champ, don't worry, you'll be fine, just hang in there," would that have helped? Maybe it would for a moment, but that's not what he needed. He needed someone to believe in him, to encourage him, someone to give him real hope. I want to show you something. We're going to put it up on the screen. One writer that I was looking at believes that there's not just one type of hope, but there's different types of hope. And this is what he came up with. Again, read them on the screen. First, he says there's inborn hope. He said this is the hope that children are born with. It's their natural basic disposition. They might lose it later on, but they have it as children. Number two, he said, is chosen hope. This is the type of hope when you choose to believe in the best possible outcome. Number three is borrowed hope. This is when another person is hopeful for you and you find yourself believing in their hope for you. That's kind of like the hope in this story of the boy. There's false hope. This type of hope is built around a magical wish or fantasy. It results from a distortion of reality. But finally, there's mature hope. And he says that this type of hope is based on an understanding that however things turn out, they are still worthwhile. That's a great way to see hope, mature hope. That even in our most difficult circumstances, there is something that can always be worthwhile. Again, that was the hope the teacher showed, even in that suffering, that there was something worthwhile to be gained. Are you starting to see the difference between optimism and hope? I'm not sure how well I've actually articulated it. And please be clear, these are both vitally important and valuable character traits. They are both positive, and they both need people to embrace them. We need our optimists, like I said, to keep a smile on our face, to keep reminding us not to worry so much and not to stress so much and enjoy life and keep trusting that things will get better. But we also need hopeful people who can be honest with us about how things are, but then point us towards something more. We need our flowers. We also need our plants. So what does our faith tradition have to say about optimism versus hope? Guess how many times the Bible uses the word optimism? 0. I know I read the entire thing yesterday and it wasn't in there at all. No, I didn't, but I looked it up. The Bible does not talk about optimism. And that probably doesn't surprise you. It doesn't surprise me. I doubt there was even such a concept back then. Optimism is a more modern word or idea. Now, although the word optimism isn't in the Bible, there are certainly passages that hint at it. Philippians 4:4 says, "Be joyful." I repeat, always be joyful. That's optimism. Ecclesiastes 3 says, "Eat, drink, and enjoy your life for as long as you have it." That's optimism. Ephesians 5, "Be filled with the Spirit, sing and make melody to the Lord in your heart." That's optimism. Some optimists quote the very beginning of the Bible. What does it say after each day of creation? God saw that it was good. In other words, the optimist can say, God created all things with the hope of goodness, and therefore we ought to be positive and happy and trusting that goodness can and will always have the last word. So even if the word optimism isn't in the Bible, you can make the case that it is a vital characteristic of our faith, a way of living our faith into the world. So God bless all of you who are eating and drinking and making melody and being joyful. You inspire us to live with a positive attitude. What about hope? Well, I'm sure you don't need to tell me to tell you that the Bible is dripping with words of hope. I call it one of the holy trinity of the biblical words. Now faith, hope, and love abide, it says in Corinthians. It's one of the top 3. It doesn't matter where you turn in the Bible, you will find words, images, stories, parables of hope. In the Old Testament, the rainbow appearing in the sky, a reminder of God's providence. That's hope. The psalmist who wrote these words, "I lift my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth." That's hope. The father of the prodigal son in Jesus' famous story, searching the horizon, refusing to give up on his son. That's hope. The Gospel of John, Jesus said these words to his worried followers, "Do not be afraid. In my Father's house there are many rooms, and one has been prepared for you." That's hope. It runs through the Bible like a colorful thread through a quilt, drawing us back again and again, inviting us to keep our hearts and minds open to new possibilities. To be a person of this book really is to be a person of hope. But the passage that always speaks to me of the reality of hope is the one part of the one that I read to you today, and that's the escape from slavery of the Israelites. Remember that they had faced years of harsh punishment under Pharaoh, but they never lost hope that one day someone was going to come and lead them out of slavery. That person, of course, was Moses. Moses finally comes along and leads them out of Egypt into freedom. He gives them the pathway to realize their hope. But here's the thing about that story. Once out of freedom, once they had freedom, was life good? Not really. They were free, but ahead of them was many years, many miles in the wilderness, wandering, hungry, lost, before they would eventually reach the promised land. But they did it. And in the process, they never gave up on their faith, never gave up on God, and they never gave up on each other. Hope doesn't see the world through rose-colored glasses. It sees it as it is. It never expects the world to be perfect. It never expects others to be perfect. It never believes that over the next horizon everything is going to be perfect. But it also never gives up. It is the motivating force in life that says that you keep moving forward. Even if you get over one trial and enjoy it for but a moment and the next one comes upon you, you don't stop. Just because you've successfully crossed the Jordan River, it doesn't mean that there isn't a wilderness ahead. But you tackle it, and then you tackle the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And in the process, you don't give up on each other, you don't give up on life, you don't give up on God, and you don't give up on the journey. Because you are moving forward. And as you do it, you are solving problems, you are growing stronger, you are growing deeper, you are creating pathways, you are finding worthwhile things, and you are living your life. One thing I hear about this pandemic, and one thing I say to myself, is that it feels like it's never going to end. It's one thing after another. We get through the first wave, we get some relief, we get through the second wave, we hear about vaccines, but then the vaccines are delayed, and now we're talking about variants, and suddenly we're told to wear 2 masks instead of 1, and on it goes, and it's wearisome, and it wears us all down. But I want you to think of that story of the Israelites. It wasn't a one-time thing. They got out of Egypt and they're free. But it was a long, ongoing journey of highs and lows. But onward they journeyed, one step at a time, dealing with things, overcoming things, defeating things, creating things as they went, and never giving up. And we must never give up. Because if we have mature hope, even in the struggles, we will find something worthwhile. You don't have to be an optimist to have hope. In fact, those Israelites were some of the most negative people you'll ever find. If you don't believe me, read the story. You don't have to be an optimist to have hope. You just have to believe that the journey is always worth taking, and that there's always a pathway to be found through it, even if it's the pathway that you have to create yourself. Hopeful people don't give up. They don't give up on themselves, they don't give up on each other, and they don't give up on their faith. A man told this story about his wife, Helen, and let me end with this story. He writes, "I remember a time when I was sitting on the antique window seat that Helen had treasured through the years. Because the original fabric had worn through, Helen had recently recovered it in a handsome corduroy. A heavy storm was in progress, and I sat staring at the rain pelting down on dead autumn leaves. The gloomy look of the garden seemed to match the mood of hopelessness that had overcome me. Problems at work had made me fearful of the future. Basic questions that surfaced with the coming of middle age had made me fearful of life itself. I started to light my pipe and accidentally spilled some hot ash, which burned a hole right in the center of the window seat cover. Seeing what had happened, Helen calmly threaded a needle and stitched a beautiful flower over the charred spot. When I looked at the finished work, I realized that it was a striking symbol of our long life together, and my spirits began to soar. I had married a repairer of broken spirits, a healer of wounds, a person whose very presence was an antidote to fear. Moreover, I understood perhaps for the first time that it was Helen's deep and abiding trust in God's goodness that made it possible for her to be a source of light and a harbinger of hope in times of darkness and despair. And my heart filled with gratitude and my heart filled with hope. To our optimists, thank you. Thank you for your smiles, your energetic presence, your refusal to let life get you down, your reminder not to stress and worry, but to enjoy life. We need you. And to our hope givers, thank you too. Thank you for seeing the world as it is, but refusing to give up on what it could be. You are weaving a healing thread through life, finding what is still worthwhile, and in the process, creating beauty and hope and peace. Amen.